Welcome back, everybody, to the NCAA Next Step Dynasty here on NCAA Football 14 as we watch the stars of tomorrow competing in the 2023 college football season. Today, we will be previewing season number 2 of the series, going over some of the top teams and players around the country, along with the preseason polls, preseason All-Americans, Heisman Watch, Conference Outlook, all that good stuff. Last year, we didn't know anybody going into the season, so it was kind of like a blank slate. But this year, we know some of these players, we know some of these teams, and we know some of their stories, but we're also going to see some brand new players as well. So it's going to be a fun mix of guys that we know and guys who we're just being introduced to. Along with that, the big change in college football this season is that we are changing from a 4-team college football playoff to a 12-team playoff, which will drastically change how the season is played this year. So let's not waste any more time, and let's get this started. We're going to do this by conference, starting with the SEC, which of course holds all the talent in college football. They had the top 2 teams in the country according to the preseason polls, with 5 teams in the top 10 and 9 teams in the top 25. That starts with the number 1 team in the country entering the season, the defending national champion Georgia Bulldogs, led by head coach Delvin Hines. Georgia, of course, won the national championship last year in very exciting fashion, but they did lose a lot of talent, most notably their star quarterback Clyde Williamson, who was the number 1 pick in the draft to the Detroit Lions, along with many other starters. But the great thing about last year's Georgia team is they're an overall pretty young group, and they have a lot of their key players returning. The new starting quarterback will be junior Aram Ketchikan. He's a lefty quarterback, not the biggest guy. He's not as good as Clyde Williamson, but he has developed for a few years and is pretty solid. Out of the backfield, Georgia is returning their star running back, Patalomayo Malualu, who ran for 9 touchdowns across the 2 college football playoff games, winning the college football playoff tournament's most valuable player. Along with Malualu, they have plenty of other talented skill position players at wide receiver and tight end. Montrell Hughes and Quincy Pearson both had big roles on last year's team. And as you look at their defense, it all starts with Tykeem Rogers, the big, nasty defensive end. And along with him, guys like Shad Swisher and Grant Remba, who had big roles on this defense last year, are back. Number 2, we have Oklahoma, led by Owen Hitstick Jackson as their head coach. Oklahoma had 4 first-rounders, including their Heisman-winning quarterback, Masaru Lee, who was drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't know if there's a team across the country who lost more talent than the Oklahoma Sooners, but this is the University of Oklahoma we're talking about. They know how to breed talent like it's nothing. Although they are losing Masaru Lee at quarterback, their replacement for him is very talented in his own right. Redshirt junior Romeo Colochi battled with Masaru Lee last year in the preseason for the starting quarterback spot. Obviously, he didn't win it, but he's going to be the guy going forward, and he's got a lot of help in the backfield and out wide with Darion Seals, Tyshawn Bankston, and at wide receiver, senior Bryce Berry III returns after having a big season a year ago. He's expected to have an even bigger role this year for the Sooners, along with guys like Matt Montgomery and Noah Hampton, who are going to see an increase in snaps. Defensively, Oklahoma lost a lot of talent, but there are some really good players here. Rayshawn Russell, Udo Aflobi, and Gilbert Smith lead the way. Gilbert Smith is being looked at as a first-round pick in next year's draft, one of the best pass rushers in all of college football, and he has the opportunity to be a game record this season. The Texas Longhorns were pretty disappointing a year ago. They opened up the season as the number 4 team in the country, and things didn't go well for them. They did lose a lot of talent in the draft, including their previous starting quarterback, Benedict Sparrow, who many blame for Texas's failures a season ago. Many Texas fans are pleased that they don't have Benedict Sparrow throwing interceptions for them anymore, and redshirt freshman Onyx St. James will be the new quarterback this year for the Longhorns. Out of the backfield, they have a new starting running back with their 2 leading rushers leaving for the NFL, and Arnold Giffen will hope to take the role there. Their top 2 receivers are back, including D'Aiden Washington, who's being looked at as a first-round pick in this year's draft. And along with him, I'm excited to watch a full season of Tyrese Barracon. He only caught 6 passes last year after missing most of the season with a hand injury. Texas has a great defense with 4 or 5 future first-rounders here. Maurice Taylor, Jeremiah McDuffie, I.T. Thomas, McKelly Forrester Jr., and Josiah Wake are all really, really good players. But the name to watch is Babatunde Mamadou, the junior linebacker who had an outstanding season a year ago for Texas, 6'8", 270. He's a freak. Coming in on number 7, we had the University of Alabama, who lost a number of talented players, particularly in the secondary, along with one of their top receivers, Jaden Wilson-Miller. This is a run-first team through and through, with Quincy Murphy, who ran for 1,300 yards last year as a powerful, bruising back, but he's not even their lead runner. Kyle McCloskey ran for 1,700 yards last year. So these two players combined for 3,000 rushing yards as a group, and they are both back this season. There are some questions at the quarterback position for Alabama. Their starter last year, Bryson Byrne, is back for his senior season. Wasn't great as a junior, and I'm hoping he'll be able to improve this season before entering the NFL. Despite losing their leading receiver for a year ago, they do have some really good players here, including Khalil Hassan, Cooper Jensen, and Coleslaw Appleby. Defensively, they're pretty solid as well. Maybe not as good as they were a year ago, but they've got a lot of guys here. Easterberg, Davis, Law, and Chibuke are all expected to step up. Arkansas is in an interesting spot. They lost their starting quarterback from last year, but they are the number 10 team in the country. Now, they were really excited about their new 5-star freshman, Josiah Farrell, who's a really good prospect, but after suffering a season-ending injury in the spring game, it'll be Kader Sissoko who starts at quarterback for them this year. It almost doesn't matter who they have at QB, because out of the backfield, they have running back Cannon McMullen, who ran for 2,000 yards a season ago, finishing 4th on the Heisman voting, and he is back in the Heisman watch early in this season. Kentucky comes right behind them at number 11. The Wildcats ended up winning the Peach Bowl a year ago and are expected to take another leap this season with a large amount of their core returning. That includes senior quarterback Isaiah Gordon, who is a dynamic football player. This is somebody who can make plays with his legs, with his arm. He's a really fun player to watch, and if he has a good season, he could be a first-round pick. Now, they did lose their starting running back, Benny Dixon. It'll be Fadiala Cisse and Chris Gray, a pair of freshmen, manning the backfield. One of their star receivers, Cassius Morris, is back. We'll see if he has an even bigger role this season. Auburn comes right behind them at number 13, and they lost a large portion of their offense. Their 2 top running backs and their 2 top receivers from a year ago are now in the NFL, but their quarterback from last year, Sidney McDonald, is back. McDonald enters the season as a projected first-round pick. 6'4", 220 pounds. He really gives you all you look for in the quarterback position, but they are losing their 4 best offensive playmakers from a year ago. Socrates Doherty, Patrick Clementine, Akari June, John Trinity, and Trayvon Scott are all expected to take a step up, with Auburn's top running backs and receivers gone. They have a great linebacking core of Stromboli, Anderson, and senior Devin Banks, who also enters the season as a likely first-round pick after having a phenomenal junior season. Coming in at number 22, we have the Florida Gators, a team who I feel like has more talent than their ranking spot suggests. Now, they lost a lot of guys in the NFL draft, including linebacker Cyrus Okpoko Jr., who was the number 2 pick in the draft to the Houston Texans. They also had a surprise with their quarterback, Genesis Moon, leaving school early, so they had a QB battle between junior Ernie Capelar and freshman Deontay Harris. Ultimately, Capelar won the job. He's a very athletic quarterback who makes plays with his legs and is pretty solid as a passer as well. However, the star of this offense is certainly the run game, in particular, senior running back Elijah Bryant, who finished in 6th place in the Heisman voting last year and enters the season as a preseason Heisman watch candidate as well. He's likely a possible first-round pick in next year's draft. In my opinion, the best running back in the country. Along with him, most of their other top receivers and tight end from a year ago are back, so although they lost their quarterback and a lot of their main defensive players, pretty much all of their offensive weapons from a year ago are back. Tennessee rounds out the top 25 as the number 25 team in the country. This is a very young group. He didn't lose too many guys last year. Junior quarterback Benjamin McKenzie is back after missing the second half of the season with an injury. Tennessee was not the same when he got injured, and with him healthy, I think this team could really outperform their ranking. They do have a new running back with Chris Johnson now in the NFL. It'll be junior Nolan Franchise leading the backfield. At receiver, sophomore Skeeter Darlington, coming off a great true freshman season, returns. Tennessee's main receiving group is back. Zach Torres Jr. returns, and I think you can expect the Michael Jackson to have a bigger role as well. LSU comes in right outside of the top 25 at number 27, led by their new head coach Everett Lemieux, who coached for South Alabama last year. Last season was very up and down for LSU. They started 0-7, but they won their final 5 games. Quarterback Thomas Torominko is back, and he had a very up and down freshman season, The upside is there, but he has to be a lot more consistent as a passer. LSU did lose their leading rusher, Ronnie DeRugi, who was drafted in the 3rd round by the Ravens, but I think Justin West could be in line for a big season. He's a talented senior bruising running back, and alongside him, I think junior Ryan Faison could really break out as well next to him in the backfield. LSU is a very young receiving corps. One of their top recruits from a couple of years ago, Kyon Clark, was supposed to star for this team, but he ended up actually transferring to Navy following the previous head coach, Jabari Achabe. So they're going to need some of these other players to really step up in place of Clark, who was supposed to have a big season for the Tigers. They have a lot of good defensive players. Pure Morales, Alexander Ekwuneme, and Keontae Sparks Jr. lead a very talented defensive unit. Texas A&M comes in as number 37, which is certainly a disappointment considering last year they started the season in the top 10. This was one of the youngest teams in college football last year. They did not have a single player drafted, and that's because their entire core is back. Led by junior quarterback Luca Franco, who is expecting a major breakout season, and alongside him, senior running back Kason McDaniels is one of the best playmakers in the SEC. Last year, I said that I did not think Texas A&M was going to live up to their top 10 ranking because they're a super young team who needs to improve. Well, they've had a year to improve, so it's put up or shut up time now for the Aggies, who returned their top receivers as well with Quinn Clark, Benjamin Cannon, and Josh Cook. Along with him, they've got some good defensive players as well. Texas A&M needs to exceed this ranking and have a good season, or else the sky could be starting to fall in College Station. South Carolina comes in as number 53 with a new head coach, Edmund Setzer, who was fired last year at Ole Miss. They are losing their 2 top receivers, Bryson Smith and Letty Amon, who both play for the New England Patriots, but their quarterback, Marco Prince, is back. Prince had a really good sophomore season. He had some phenomenal performances, but they are going to need some of these younger receivers, along with running back Braylon Murphy, to really step up. The Mississippi teams bring up the rear in the SEC, starting with Mississippi State, led by senior quarterback DeAndre Smith, who I think could have a pretty big season. Mississippi State's defense is flat out bad, but their offense is flat out good. Along with Smith, they've got a ton of playmakers with Malik Brunswick, Romeo Gardner, Chris Scruggs, and James Francis. And then we have Ole Miss, projected to finish in dead last in the SEC with a new head coach, Patrick Daly. They lost a number of guys to the NFL this past season, and I think they are the least talented team in the SEC. And along with having a new coach, it could be a rough season in Oxford. They do have some great linemen, and I do think junior quarterback Danny Kendrickson is a pretty good player. Kendrickson is a super athlete, and I don't know if he's going to be a great pro prospect, but he is a dynamic quarterback who can make plays at a high level. Let's move on to the Big Ten now. Specifically, we're going to start with the Big Ten West because they made some major additions, adding Notre Dame and Oregon to the division. And I would maybe argue the Big Ten West might be better than the Big Ten East, which is crazy because that's never the case. Wisconsin, who won the Big Ten West last year, is currently projected to finish in last. So far, we have Notre Dame at the top. They are the number 4 team entering the season, and they did lose a whole lot of guys to the NFL, including their leading rusher, Nate Washington, their starting quarterback, Sosa Hupie, and a lot of their star defensive players. However, the preseason polls do still have a lot of expectations for the Fighting Irish in their new conference. Notre Dame is still a really, really talented team, but I do worry they could underperform because they are a very young group. Sophomore quarterback Baz Boyd will now be under center. I think he's a much better fit at quarterback than what they had in the past with Sosa Hupie. Boyd is a much more athletic and dynamic player, and I think you really need that rushing ability to thrive in this scheme. Despite losing Nate Washington, who was one of the best running backs in the country last year, I think MJ Hill is going to step up along with Jared Richardson, and they've got some good receivers with Jadon Lewis and Cyril Churchill. Their defense is phenomenal. Raymar Beckett, Chase Carlson, Arthur Balthazar, Stroloff Steinklesen, they're all really good, but the name to watch is defensive end Adai Adwar, who had a phenomenal junior season a year ago and could be a first-round pick next year. Next up, we get to USC, a team who was projected to do very poorly a year ago. I told you guys they were going to be good, and they were damn good, led by their running back Patrick Dahlfriend, who is now in the NFL, so they're going to have to find a way to replace him. Their quarterback from last year, Scotty Kimbrell II, is back. He had some bad performances, including the 5-interception game against Notre Dame, but he is still a very talented player. Anthony Raymond had a big role in the backfield last year as the complement to Patrick Dahlfriend, and now this year Raymond is going to be the guy, if you will. Monty Bradley should have a big role as well. And then at wide receiver, I'm expecting big things from junior Hot Rod Pryor, who came in as a hot-shot 5-star prospect a couple years ago. Didn't live up to the hype as a true freshman, but last year as a sophomore, he was really, really good. Cole Adams, Cash Wade, and tight end Will O'Neal are also big, big pieces. Next up, we get to Iowa, a team who finished under 500 last year. They lost a lot of key pieces. I'm very surprised they're starting the season in the top 25, and I do think they will not outperform this ranking. I think Iowa is going to be one of the more fraudulent teams towards the end of the top 25. They have a new quarterback and freshman Quadell Owens. I expect this to be a run-first team with running back Chu likely having a big role. This kid is pretty small, 5'8", 163, but he's shifty and elusive between the tackles. Iowa has some talent in terms of their receiving core, and they have a really good young tight end because, as you know, Iowa brews tight ends. DeAndrew Donald has a shot to be a first-round pick in a couple years if all goes well. They've got some really good players on defense, too, particularly their defensive line with Trey Peters, Ross Hall, and Marvin Walker II. Minnesota comes in as number 19. They won the championship a couple years ago, led by head coach Nehemiah Richardson. They lost their starting quarterback and running back tandem, but they do have some good replacements. I think sophomore Kane Thompson's going to be a really solid quarterback, but what excites me about this team is the offensive skill position players. Senior running back Riley Norval, a transfer from North Dakota State, is expected to be the starter, and I think he will make up for the production they are losing with Rocket Reddick now in the NFL. At wide receiver, Voshawn Burris is a great senior, could be a first or second round pick, but the name to watch is true freshman Kareem Shaheed. He is a dynamic, shifty athlete with the ball in his hands. I think they're going to use him kind of like a Deebo Samuel, try to craft different ways to get the ball in his hands. Kerry Boyd is another good true freshman receiver, and they've got some really solid NFL draft prospects across their roster. Oregon is projected to finish 5th in the division, but they do have a 99 overall team as one of the highest rated groups in college football. Their star quarterback from last year, Barrett Cherokee, is back. He is one of the most dynamic and explosive players in all of college football. I think he is a sleeper for the Heisman Trophy. He's not currently on the Heisman watch, although he really should be. I think he's going to take a leap this year. Their leading rusher from a year ago, Noel Hilaire, is back, and he's going to be even better. They did lose their top 2 receivers, Tyler Royal and Deron Payton. Payton caught the Hail Mary in the Rose Bowl to win them the game, but I think sophomore Justice Everdeed is really going to take a leap this year for the Oregon football program, and they've got some other good playmakers alongside him with Avante Rogers, and then at tight end, Ezekiel Ayutondo, who's one of the best tight ends in college football. Their offensive line is great too, with Ray McLeod, Carlisle Kaplan, and Solomon Fa'amate. Their pass rush is phenomenal as well, with Armstrong, Akintola, Wallace Lee Anderson, and Spencer Gotham. Their front 7 is great. Their offensive line is great. I think they're really going to outperform their ranking. As we move to the Big Ten East, we start with Michigan, who opens the season as the number 3 team in the preseason polls. They made the college football playoff last year and lost to South Alabama, but they will have an opportunity at revenge as South Alabama comes to the Big House in Week 4. Quarterback Bartholomew Blunt, the Heisman favorite for most of last year, is back, and he is the preseason favorite for the Heisman Trophy. They did lose a lot of their top offensive players. Running back Charles Wiggins was drafted in the 2nd round by the Detroit Lions, so Casey Aceron, who was really good last year, is going to take an even bigger role for the offense. Their leading receiver, Hollis Francois, also gone. He was picked in the 2nd round by the Cincinnati Bengals. So I think T.K. Thomas, the big senior, who could be a first-round pick next year, is going to be an even more important weapon for Bartholomew Blunt in the offense, along with Evan Baker, Creed Raven, Kurt Henning, and Isaiah McGowan. They've got a really solid defense as well, led by K.L. Hamp, Costello Benedetto, and Maxo Basili. Ohio State comes in as number 8. The Buckeyes were a little bit disappointing last year, but most of their core from a season ago is back. Senior quarterback Margot Brunley will hope to take a step up. He certainly wasn't bad as a junior, but I think there's more talent than he showed a year ago. Their leading rusher, Emmanuel Cashmere, has graduated, but I think that's just going to open up more time for the dynamic sophomore Mookie Davis, who was really solid as a freshman. Another player to look out for is Ramir Conwell, another dynamic sophomore who I think is great too. Their top receivers, for the most part, are back with Green, Suggs, and Wilt, but it's the defense that really stands out. Cornerback Jameer Jefferson Jr. might have been the best defensive player in college football last year. He's going to be a top 5 pick, assuming he holds his stock as a senior. Then we get to Michigan State, just outside of the top 25 at number 26. They lost their quarterback last year, Nathan Bruins, who got drafted by New Orleans. They're hoping sophomore Jay Jordan can replicate his production. In terms of offensive skill position players, Michigan is loaded. Senior running back Joshua Calico was a little disappointing last year, but he was banged up for a lot of the season, and I think him and Jalen Dunbar are going to be a great duo. Out wide, they are led by junior receiver John Wiggins, who was one of the top pass catchers in college football a season ago as a true sophomore, and there's no reason to think he can't keep it going. Michigan State's 2 best receivers from last year, along with Wiggins, Barrow and Colin Dorsett III, are also both back. Their defense is suspect, but their offense is great. Then we get to Penn State, who was very disappointing last year. They were supposed to win the Big Ten, and they didn't even make a bowl game. They lost a lot of their top defensive players and their starting quarterback, so they're hoping Lyndon Kirkstead, the junior, can lead the offense forward after a disappointing 5-win season last year. Along with him, their top offensive weapons from last year are back. Aaron Robinson, the running back, is hoping to break out this year as a junior. And along with him, Shai Jones-Porter is one of the best playmakers in the Big Ten. He had a great sophomore season last year and should be even better as a junior. Along with him, their other starting receiver across from him, Ark Rain, is back, along with Gavin Randolph. And Chad Johnson might have been the best tight end in the country last year. Defensively, they've got a really good secondary with Jack Jones and Yusuf Khalidi. I think Penn State's going to do a lot better than last year. One of my big sleeper teams for this year is Northwestern, who's projected 102nd team in the country, the 3rd worst Power 5 team, only behind Kansas and Iowa State. But I think they will severely outperform that ranking, led by senior quarterback Kevon Dorn. I will say I have a very high track record with picking sleepers. Last year, teams like Rutgers, Duke, and USC were not projected highly. I said they were going to do good, and I was right. Koko Zovic and Bubu Drame are 2 really good offensive playmakers, and Moses Munoz is a likely NFL draft pick as well. I think Northwestern will severely outperform expectations, and very well could fight for a bowl spot, despite being projected to finish dead last in the Big Ten. Last season, the ACC did not produce a college football playoff team, so I think this conference is going to come into the season with a chip on their shoulder with a lot of really good teams at the top, and that starts with number 5, Clemson, a team who was good last year. They went 10-3, but they weren't a true contender as they were expected to. They lost some key players, including their number 1 receiver, John Vincent II, who was drafted in the 2nd round by the Raiders, but they do have a lot of their key players coming back. That includes senior quarterback Cade Hutchinson, who opens up the season as a Heisman contender and the projected number 1 pick in next year's NFL Draft. Last season, we deemed Hutchinson as the chosen one of the top quarterback prospects that we've ever seen, and he very quietly lived up to the hype. His running back, Kobe Henderson, is back. Henderson tore his Achilles last year in Clemson's heartbreaking loss to NC State, but he is back fully healthy for Week 1. If he does not come back as the same player, have no fear, because they've got some good backups behind him with Chigalomokolmo and Matthias DeRitter. DeRitter was their main running back last year after Henderson got hurt. At wide receiver, they've got a lot of good players here with Jordan Jones, Xavier Mayo, Malachi Evans, Kion Cordell, and true freshman Ty Keon Jr., along with tight end Latrell McAllister. Their defense should be one of the best in the country with Markeith Brown, DeAndre Herring, Damian French, Zaire Jehoram, who is now eligible to play, and Alec Padfield. The secondary is the strength of this team with 4 legitimately good starters. Next up, we have Florida State, who starts the season as the number 9 team in the country. They lost a lot of guys in the draft, including 2 first-rounders. This is a team who was undefeated for most of the season, and at one point, they looked like a lock for the college football playoff until they kind of imploded at the end of the season. Junior quarterback Jacob King is back. He's a very good game manager for this team, but they are a run-first team, and they are going to once again be heavily reliant on Brody Kluge, who was their best offensive player last season. He is maybe the most dynamic player in all of college football, and he is back. Most of Florida State's top receiving options are back as well, but again, Brody Kluge is their offense. I think Garrett Rodriguez is going to have a breakout year, along with guys such as Romani Pierre-Cross, Stanley Bentley, Connor Roberts, and Jaquan Jackson. They had a top 5 defense in the country last year, and although they lost a lot of key guys, they do have some good players here and some possible breakout candidates on that side of the ball as well. The Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets were one of the biggest surprises in the country last year. They had no expectations going into the season, and they won the ACC along with the Orange Bowl, but they are losing a lot of key talent from last year. They have a new starting quarterback with sophomore Rowan Tanabe, who is a very dynamic and athletic player. Tanabe actually caught the go-ahead touchdown in double overtime of the Orange Bowl. He has the ability to play running back and receiver, but he has such a good arm, he's going to play quarterback. If Tanabe struggles, Georgia Tech is probably going to rely on the run once again. Jordan Brown began last season as a backup, but after their starter got hurt, he emerged as a Heisman contender and is expected to be very good once again as a senior. Along with him, they have some good receivers as well. Their top receiver last year, Stavion Shores, is back, and they've got some really good players alongside him as well. Their defense is also supposed to be really good. They have one of the best front sevens in college football. Their pass rush is supposed to be really, really good once again. After them, we get to the Miami Hurricanes, who start the year as the 15th ranked team in the country. Miami was a little bit disappointing last season, and I feel like their program needs to take that step up, or else head coach Greg Waters-Key could find himself on the hot seat. Starting quarterback Scooter Young Jr. is back. He missed some time with injury last year as a sophomore, but he is a really good player who I think is going to be a breakout candidate for the offense. Sophomore running back Darius Edwards II will be the full-time running back. E.J. Twyman is a great receiver as well, although they did lose their top two receivers from a year ago. They've got a great cornerback duo, but the rest of their defense is very suspect. Next, we get to Pitt, who lost a lot of their key players last year, including quarterback Jonah Moliure, who was drafted in the third round by the Indianapolis Colts. Their new quarterback will be sophomore Warren Bishop, who won the QB battle. He didn't really play last year, so he hasn't gotten real college snaps, and now Pitt is trusting him to be the starting quarterback, probably for the next 3 seasons. Along with him, they have the new starting running back and senior Kevin Lamotsky. This is a defense-first team, though, with Admiral Greenwood, Clifford, Venter, Rebele. This is a team who's really going to rely on their defense this upcoming season. Rutgers has just been added to the ACC after a great season in the Big Ten. They lost their starting quarterback, Johannes Franz, to the NFL, and they had a quarterback battle in the offseason, which was ultimately won by senior graduate transfer Sean Ferwerda. Again, this is a run-first team, though. Their best player last year was junior running back D.R. Antoine, who returned this season as a senior and should be even better for the Rutgers offense as they count on him more than ever. Antoine is certainly the keys to this team going anywhere. North Carolina's ceiling, in my opinion, is really high, and they did lose some of their best offensive players. Rambo Lumpkins, the top receiver off the board, along with running back Igby Prince. But they got some great news with starting quarterback Graham Fisher coming back in the lineup after suffering a season-ending injury halfway through the year. When Fisher was healthy, this team looked like a contender for the national championship, and they kind of fell apart once he got injured, even though the backup, Jameer Stewart, was statistically really good. Despite losing their 2 best offensive weapons last year, they still have a lot of playmakers on this team. Senior running back Jamison Watson is expected to take a big leap, along with Jalen West and true freshman Riley Lumpkins, the younger brother of Rambo. Tight end Hamza Hamilari is one of the best tight ends in the country, and their receiving corps should be fine despite losing Rambo Lumpkins, who caught 15 touchdowns a year ago as a redshirt sophomore. After 10 years away from the ACC, Maryland is back. Maryland and Rutgers moved into the ACC together this season, as the Terps are projected to be led by senior quarterback Josh Ganymede, who had a pretty good season last year. He led Maryland to a huge upset win over Ohio State, although the rest of the Terps season last year was pretty underwhelming. At running back, Nick DiMaggio should have a big breakout year, and they have a great receiving corps with Alton Holt, Jalen Douglas, and Antrell Scott. Douglas, a redshirt freshman, is certainly the name to watch out of this group. And then on their defense, a name to watch is linebacker Sandalio Cortez, who quietly was one of the best defensive players in the country last season and comes back as a junior. My sleeper team in the ACC this year is Virginia Tech, who is projected to finish dead last in the conference. They're projected to be the 5th worst Power 5 team in college football, but don't get it twisted. This team is going to be good. Sophomore quarterback DeAndre Jones returns after being the starter last year as a true freshman. There were some bumps in the road last year for Jones, but I expect him to really improve, especially with some very talented offensive weapons who should break out. Out of the backfield, senior running back Sammy Cordaw III, I think is going to have a really good season. And then at wide receiver, Rashid Salid. This kid is a weapon with the ball in his hands. I think he's going to be one of the main breakout stars of this season. And although Virginia Tech is projected to finish dead last in their conference, I think they're going to be a pleasant surprise. Next, we move to the Big 12, who had a good offseason, adding Vanderbilt and Missouri. And I think the Big 12 really has a lot of momentum right now, despite losing Oklahoma and Texas a couple seasons ago. They've done a really good job of rebounding. Last year's champion, West Virginia, is the favorite to open up the season. They did lose some of their better offensive players to the NFL, but senior quarterback Jose Alvaro is back. Statistically, Alvaro was one of the best passers last year in the country, and he enters the season as a preseason Heisman candidate and a guy who I think is going to be even better for them this year. They are going to be relying on new offensive playmakers. Tucker McKenzie and Lamar Rogers are going to need to have big seasons for this team, along with their defense. UCF was a very pleasant surprise last year, led by senior quarterback Bay Morant. In their first year in the Big 12, they at one point were a contender for the national championship. Morant is gone, so they're going to need to replace him here with redshirt freshman Nolan Mitchell II. Mitchell learned under Bay Morant last year and should hopefully have a good season for them. Out of the backfield, Gideon Atwater is back, along with freshman Kobe Iverson. And you can't talk about this team without talking about Jensen Young, who was a Fred Biletnikoff Award finalist last year, finishing in third place. I think he's going to be even better this year, despite the quarterback change. Next up, we get to Vanderbilt, who's ranked as the 28th team to start the season. Vanderbilt was in a loaded SEC conference last year, and they still made a bowl game. If you have not bought stock yet in Vanderbilt, buy it now before it's too late. I think Trey Libby is one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the country. I think he's going to have a great season this year for the Commodores as a sophomore, and they've got some weapons around him. Guinness Talladega is a really talented young sophomore running back, and Joshua Ubuko, I think, is really going to break out, although he did have 1,000 yards last year. They have a really solid defense as well. I think Vanderbilt could really be a surprise contender for the playoff. We get to Missouri, who lost a lot of key players last year, including quarterback Shiloh McDuff, who was picked in the second round by the Buffalo Bills. I still have some high hopes for this Missouri team, led by a new quarterback, graduate transfer Latavius Merrington, coming in from Eastern Washington. I think with his dynamic skill set, he will adapt just fine to the FBS level of football. They are going to need some of these new offensive weapons to step up, with running back Bentley Maurice and true freshman Kyrie Hamilton. At wide receiver, they're hoping for a big season from Tyler Maxwell, and they've got a great cornerback trio with Jamison Anderson, Kylan Morton, and Chide Amazu. I think Missouri could be really solid if their quarterback plays well. Now we get to the Pac-12, and this conference, it does not have as much momentum as, say, the Big 12 or the Big 10. They lost Oregon last year, they lost UCLA and USC the year before, and the preseason favorite to win this conference was not even in their conference last year, that being the Air Force Falcons, who won the Mountain West a season ago. I think Air Force is really going to underwhelm some people. I don't think their roster is good enough to win the conference, although I am excited about redshirt freshman quarterback Keanu Kamialoa, who I think will not disappoint this season. I just don't think they have enough high-end talent alongside him to be a true contender in the Pac-12, and I think the preseason committee has taken a little bit too much stock in what happened last year in the Mountain West. Boise State is also moved into the Pac-12, and although they lost their top receiver from a year ago, Zion Montgomery, they should be still a really good offense with sophomore quarterback Skipper Lansdale back in the fold. Lansdale had a pretty good freshman season, all things considered. Boise State started the season off slow, but they did end up making a bowl game, and I think they're going to be a better team than Air Force this year. Zachary Love and Elliot Marcoux should have big roles as playmakers for the offense. And then we get to Fresno State, who had a lot of expectations last year. They started in the preseason top 25, and they disappointed. Along with that, their best player from last year, Alec Bostic, the running back, is gone. He is now in the NFL with the Titans as an undrafted free agent. They had a true freshman starting quarterback last year, Jebediah Muskett. He is back for his sophomore season. Muskett was up and down last year, but with Alec Bostic gone, he's not going to have his star running back to depend on. So Muskett's going to need to break out for Fresno State to have a good season in the Pac-12. LaJarvis Sanders is going to be his best offensive weapon. Overall, they don't have a lot of offensive playmakers, but they do have a really good defense, particularly their linebacking core. They've got 3 or 4 really good ones. Now going back to some of the teams who were in the Pac-12 last year, we start with Washington, who's projected to finish second in the conference, led by senior quarterback Keontae Jordan. He's not the biggest guy, only 6 foot 185, but I do think he's a pretty refined passer, currently being looked at as a second or third round pick in the upcoming NFL draft. Along with him, most of their top offensive playmakers from a year ago are back, with Ben Bones, the running back, and wide receiver Anthony Kendrickson. I think the Arizona State Sun Devils have a great chance to outperform their ranking. Junior quarterback Lucas Harrington is one of the most dynamic players in the conference. Again, not the biggest guy, 6 foot 178. His arm is inconsistent, but he does have some really good playmakers, most notably senior wide receiver Hector Estrada III, who I think might be the best football player in the Pac-12, period. I think Estrada is going to have a big season, and he was really good last year, but I think he's going to be even better this year and being looked at as one of the top receivers in this year's draft. Not too far behind them is their rival, the Arizona Wildcats, who did lose their best player from last year, Scotty Pickens, who was drafted in the first round by the Titans. This is still going to be an offense-first team, and I think junior quarterback Kareem Kamara has a chip on his shoulder. I think you can make the argument that Scotty Pickens has really carried this offense for the last couple of seasons, and I think Kamara will prove to people that he doesn't need Scotty Pickens to run a functional offense. He does have a lot of playmakers, though, with a great running back with De'Arion Kellen, and at wide receiver, Vinny Will leads the way along with true freshman Salifu Diallo and sophomore Charlie Pickens, the younger cousin of Scotty. Next up, we move to the Cal Golden Bears, who, despite being projected to finish in the middle of the conference, are actually my pick to win the Pac-12. I think they have the best overall team. After losing the quarterback battle last year, sophomore Rufus Motley will take over starting duties for Cal over their longtime veteran starter, Brennan Leach. This is still a run-first team through and through. They did lose one of their leading rushers last year, Anthony Mazzeo, who was drafted by the Eagles, but their other main running back, Marquette Collins, is back, and he should have an even bigger role. Along with Collins, they have a lot of young offensive weapons who aren't seniors. Harrison Myers, Julian Abatius. Along with him at wide receiver, they've got Matamuto, Damba, Eberly Keldstan, and then at tight end, Noah Pichette is one of the top tight ends in the country. And they've got a really good defense, too, with Wally Williams, Hyman Crawley, and then Zishan Juthani, a middle linebacker. I think that team is really good, and in my opinion, they're the best team in the Pac-12. The conference I'm most excited to follow this year is the American Athletic Conference, who made some big additions, adding Middle Tennessee State and South Alabama. Middle Tennessee State and South Alabama took college football by storm last year, going undefeated and making the college football playoff. We start with Middle Tennessee State, who lost in the semifinal game to Georgia. Although I think South Alabama was a little bit better than Middle Tennessee State last year, I think the Middle Tennessee State Blue Raiders are going to be better this year because they are returning a large portion of their core. They do have a new quarterback, junior Drain Ignatius will now lead the ship, but all their top offensive weapons from last year are back, and that includes running back Barrington Britt. And at wide receiver, I'm really excited to watch Nehemiah Dalton Jr., who was one of the best receivers in the country last year before suffering a broken vertebrae halfway through the season. But he is back, healthy, good to go. And in his absence, they had a lot of guys step up, most notably Matt Burnett, who also returns, along with Lexerus and Pitts as well. Their defense is also going to be one of the best in the conference. Jamison Gray, Kenneth McGill, Justin Kaplan, and Ezekiel Uzowarike lead a very talented defensive unit. Then we get to South Alabama, who lost in the national championship game to Georgia. I think South Alabama was better than Middle Tennessee State last year, but they lost their entire core. Cardell Simpson, Tyreek Callahan, Trey Williams, and Kedrick Brown are all in the NFL. The Jaguars will be relying on a new group of players to really step up for this team, and that starts with junior quarterback Kujay Reddings. I think Kujay Reddings might be a better natural fit for this offense than Kedrick Brown was. Redding may not have the arm talent that Brown does, but he's a more dynamic athlete and should really open things up for them. Their top running back, Keon Monroe, is back as well for his senior season. Hopefully he'll stay fully healthy this year. And at wide receiver, they did lose Trey Williams, but Sammy Woosas comes in. He is now eligible to play after not being able to last year. And Michael Evans was great too. Their defense should be pretty solid as well, but I do think this team will take a step back from what they were a year ago with all their key losses on both sides of the ball. A sleeper team in this conference is the South Florida Bulls. They did lose their best player, Jordan Ruffin, drafted in the third round by the Titans, but I love their quarterback, Donovan Ferguson. He's a redshirt junior, and he's one of the most dynamic offensive players in the conference. He had a great season as a sophomore, leading them to a bowl victory over Pitt, and I think junior running back Cade Sprenger should be able to break out in the offense as well. Memphis won the conference last year, and they upset West Virginia in the Fiesta Bowl, led by a 2-interception performance by corner Harrison Harrington, who now plays for the Titans. I don't really get why Memphis is ranked so low. They won their conference championship. They won a New Year's Six Bowl, led by quarterback Caleb Custard, who started the second half of the season last year after their original starter got hurt. I think Custard's going to be a real breakout candidate for this offense. His top receiver, Jody Gentry, is back, and they've got a great defensive line with Jason Wright, Josiah Scales, and then Spencer at defensive tackle. Let's show some love to the Group 5 conferences as well. Last year, we had Middle Tennessee State and South Alabama, two Group 5 teams, come out of nowhere and make the college football playoff. And there will be at least one Group 5 team guaranteed to make the playoff with the new 12-team format. Chances are that team will come from the American Athletic Conference, but if another one of these teams wins 11 or 12 games, it's going to be hard to keep them out. Middle Tennessee State and South Alabama were both projected as preseason favorites in their conferences last year, and obviously they ended up winning their conferences pretty easily. So pay attention as we talk about the favorites for these conferences as possible sleeper playoff contenders. That starts with the highest ranked Group 5 team outside of the American Athletic, being the Ohio Bobcats, who open up at number 48. Ohio won the MAC last season, and a lot of their key players are back, including starting quarterback Ryan Xavier and running back Otis Washington Jr. Their starting running back last year, Calvin Johnson, got injured, leading to Washington coming in, and he played fantastic. He was great in the MAC championship against Western Michigan, and I think he's going to really break out. Along with him, they've got some really good high-end players with Gregory Ricks III at center and cornerback Justice Schooner. San Diego State decided to stay in the Mountain West, despite Air Force, Boise State, and Fresno State all leaving. They did lose tight end Malachi James, who was picked in the first round by the Bengals, but they do have a lot of very talented players, including senior quarterback Michael McDonald, who was the starting quarterback last year, so he is back, and I think San Diego State looks like the clear favorites as of now to win the Mountain West. Southern Miss opens up the season as the Sun Belt favorites. Their pass rush was great last year, but Roman Horn, who was picked third overall, along with Calvin Watson and Antonio Marlander, are now in the NFL. Last year, their team was all about defense. This year, they're all going to be about offense. Senior quarterback Maker Bayfield will lead the way for the offense, 6'1", 209 pounds. He compares similarly to a guy named Baker Mayfield. How ironic. They also have a really good transfer coming in, Dustin Wallace from FIU, who's going to be their starter next year. The final team we're going to go over today is a team who I have personally been very fond of for a number of years, the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers, the favorites in the Conference USA. Western Kentucky had a really good season last year. They made it to a bowl game, nearly beating Tennessee. Junior quarterback DeAndre Nzoka leads the way. I think he's going to have a breakout season for this offense as a kid who has a chance to really improve. So there you go. We've gone through all the rosters now. We're going to take a quick look at the Heisman and All-American stuff. We kind of already went over the preseason Heisman watch with Bartholomew Blunt as the favorite, followed by Kate Hutchinson, Elijah Bryant, Jose Alvaro, and Cannon McMullen. Some of the other names to watch out for include Barrett Cherokee, the Oregon quarterback, Brody Kluge, the running back out of Florida State. If Rutgers does really well, maybe Dior Antoine, the running back, can get his name in the mix. And I wouldn't be surprised if somebody comes out of nowhere and ends up winning that award, like Masaru Lee last year. Nobody really expected him to contend for the Heisman Trophy, and, well, obviously he did. Here's a look at the preseason All-American teams as well. A lot of highly productive players from a season ago. We're certainly going to see some players who kind of come out of nowhere make these spots, which is what's exciting about college football. We've got a lot of players who we know, who we followed last year, guys like Kate Hutchinson and Bartholomew Blunt, but we've also got some new players, and I'm excited to see who will rise to the occasion and who will falter. So next episode, we will go through weeks 1, 2, and 3. Week 1 does not have a lot of games, but there are plenty of in-conference SEC matchups, including the defending champion Georgia Bulldogs starting their season in Arkansas. Auburn plays Kentucky as well. That'll be a really fun game. Looking at week 2, we've got some pretty good matchups. Iowa, Ohio State, LSU, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, West Virginia, USC, Oregon, amongst them, South Carolina, Georgia. Poor South Carolina. They start their season against Oklahoma and Georgia. That's not fun. Week 3, plenty of great games as well. Tennessee, Arkansas, Alabama, Georgia. Really, all the SEC games are good. BYU, Clemson, Notre Dame, USC, Maryland, Georgia Tech, Arizona State, West Virginia, UCF, South Alabama, Oklahoma, Florida. There are going to be some really good matchups to start off the season, which should be a lot of fun. So that's going to wrap up the episode. I hope everybody enjoyed the season preview and is excited for season number 2 of the series. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're new. Peace out.